For that response, I want to move on to the climate action strategy. So in 1992, Mr. Chair, I authored the first primer on the impacts of global warming in New Brunswick and what we can do about it in terms of our share, 1992. And that was the same year that Canada signed on with countries around the world to the treaty to fight the heating climate. And in that treaty we said, everyone agreed that we would reduce our levels of carbon pollution, the emissions, to the point necessary to avoid dangerous levels of climate change, 1992, undefined. It took 20 years to come to some agreement on what that is, what constitutes a dangerous level of climate change, and the world's agreed that it's not to exceed 2 degrees Celsius, not to reach 2 degrees Celsius of warming. So that's sort of what, after 20 years, we've come to. In the climate change strategy, which government has endorsed, which was developed by an all-party, well, the strategy wasn't, but the basis for it was developed by an all-party committee, select committee of this legislature, which I know all members felt very good about the work that we did. We worked in a nonpartisan way. It was a really collegial effort, and I expect all of us are disappointed that very little of what made it into the strategy has been implemented yet. So we're still waiting to see that, and there's a couple of things in particular I wanted to highlight for this year. One was the Secretariat, the Climate Change Secretariat, needing to have the authority and the funds necessary to carry out its mandate to implement the strategy, because it has to work across so many departments, because it touches on transportation, it touches on housing, it touches on industrial performance, it touches on municipal planning, it touches on a whole range of areas. And in fact, when I was asking questions of the Minister of Energy and Resource Development about some of the plan that's been highlighted by the government so far, expanding renewable energy and improving energy efficiency, he kind of kept pitching it back to the Climate Change Secretariat at the Minister's Department. So perhaps there should be a discussion there. I'm wondering how the Minister sees his Secretariat being able to carry out its mandate without really any additional funds to move to what now I think we're all expecting will become the implementation stage of the Climate Action Plan.
Thank you to the member opposite, Mr. Chair, for speaking once again about the Climate Change Action Plan, and that it was a nonpartisan event, and that's something that we hadn't seen a lot of in recent years. So that was good work. The member from Carleton, Victoria, I want to say, was a part of that as well, and there was a lot of good input there and a lot of good work done, and it's an action plan that we're going to work towards, obviously, and take that very seriously. So that action plan itself, and I think the member touched on it, is a responsibility of all of government. All departments have a responsibility to play within those action plans. And I remind my colleagues often in Cabinet that, you know, when you're making decisions, and when we do make decisions in the Cabinet room, we have to focus on what our action items are and how all those decisions tie into the reduction of our emissions, number one, but how our decisions affect climate and our climate and our climate change. The Secretary, you know, the Secretariat, he is the coordinator, or that office is the coordinator of those initiatives, and I believe that the Premier had indicated in his questions that as for now, the Climate Change Secretariat's office and staff will remain within the budget that they are. That isn't the answer that the member opposite wants to hear, I know, but that's where we are at this point. They will work within their budgets, and you know, as initiatives move forward and more dollars are required to move those initiatives forward, then we'll finance those the best way that we can moving forward. Addressing our climate and our climate change with the action plan is important, and that is a piece of work with, I believe, 118 action items that some are long-term, some are being worked on, some are completed, but they are goals, and we have to continue to work towards those goals in order to address climate change. In order to do our part here in Canada, not just in the province, but in Canada, to do our part nationally and globally. This week, just yesterday, CBC announced, because the reporter there, Jacques Poitras, has been watching the information coming out of Environment and Climate Change Canada on which provinces are reducing their emissions, which provinces are doing their part, and which provinces are struggling with their reduction initiatives. And it's clear in those numbers that we've reduced from our 2005 levels 28%. That's a big number, I think, in comparison to the rest of not only our other Canadian jurisdictions, but globally. I still contend that globally we are a leader here in New Brunswick. Now, that's not to my credit. I just take a little piece of that, and maybe not a very small piece, but that's successive governments over time and generations over time, and with the leadership of these young people here, we're going to exceed our targets. We're going to get there. So that initiative will be ongoing, and as time goes on, we'll continue to reduce, and we'll continue to fund the Climate Change Secretariat. At this point in time, we all know that we had an obligation to meet a balanced budget first, continue to find efficiencies within the entire system, and then once we do find those efficiencies, along with paying down the debt, we'll be able to fund more into the programs that are needed. And it's not just the climate initiatives that are needed. We have a lot of pressure points in all different facets of government, with infrastructure, with social services, with mental health services, nursing care. The whole range is there where the pressures are. So if we don't hold the line now while we can, and then start investing later, we'll never be able to invest later. The tap will turn off. There'll be no more money to borrow anywhere, and we will be in a very difficult position to fund any of these positions. So the responsible thing to do is to live within our means right now, and believe you me, this section of our department, the Climate Change Secretariat and his group of people, are a very diligent group. They are more than capable of doing more with the same that they have. And as we, like I said, as we have those discussions in cabinet among the broad number of departments, we'll continue to reduce, but we'll also continue to place the importance on our climate change action plan, because we have endorsed that plan as part of our reduction strategy. In December, on December the 5th, the Premier endorsed that. We fully support it. We support the good work that was put into it. And we also will support the initiatives that come out of it. And as I said earlier in my answer, it's a broad range of departments that are involved, a broad range of departments that know that they have a responsibility to do their part as well within the departments and within this climate change action plan. So we'll continue to do that, and our climate change secretary will continue to coordinate. Is there enough? There's never enough. We never have enough money for needs like this, but we'll continue on the path of further increased funding when we have the ability to add, we will do that. And we'll just continue to do our part nationally, globally. We'll continue to reduce our emissions. And another thing, Mr. Chair, we'll continue to celebrate when we hit those targets and when we move forward, because we do deserve to congratulate ourselves when we work hard. We do deserve to acknowledge when targets are met. We do deserve to celebrate when the blood, sweat, and tears is poured in. We do deserve to celebrate when we sacrifice some of our own personal habits to reduce our emissions. And we take that very seriously here in New Brunswick. As Maritimers, we push hard. So of the whole grand scheme of things, you know, with all the jurisdictions in Canada, there's 2 maritime provinces that are leading the charge in emissions reductions. 2. We're the heavy hitters here, it seems. We're leading the way. We're showing the rest of Canada that we can do it. We're showing the rest of Canada that we have the will. We're showing the rest of Canada that we can improvise. We can adopt a plan like we have here, a climate change action plan. We can formulate it with our NGOs, with our industry, and it works for New Brunswick. And we continue to show that we can hit those targets. I'm a little disappointed that we're not being acknowledged for that more. You know, can we do more? Always. Do we want to get too far ahead of our celebrations? We probably shouldn't get too far ahead, because things can change, and we don't like to be too, as Maritimers, too cocky or too arrogant. But sooner or later, we have to start standing up and saying, yes, New Brunswick, you're doing your part. Yes, New Brunswick, you're leading the charge. Yes, New Brunswick, you should be credited for that. You should be congratulated for that. And I'm going to stand up every day, Mr. Chair, until I am finished in this role, or until I'm finished contributing overall. And I'm going to continue to say to New Brunswickers, you're doing a great job. Keep up the good work. We'll do more, and we'll beat this. We will reduce our emissions, and we will fight climate change. Thank you, Mr. Chair.